I want to play a little bit of Donald Trump's interview with Elon Musk on X last night. We've already played a lot of it in this show, but one part we have not played is when he was talking about the vice president being on the cover of Time magazine. I want you to listen to this.
I saw a picture of her on Time magazine today. She looks like the most beautiful actress ever to live. It was a drawing, and actually, she looked very much like our great first lady, Melania. She didn't look like Camilla. That's right. But of course, she's a beautiful woman, so we'll leave it at that, right?
You're shaking your head. What's your reaction to hearing that?
Well, first of all, John, this is not the kind of rhetoric or language or tone that is going to turn on voters, especially those key undecided voters in swing states who want a president who's looking out for them, who want a president who is putting their interests first. You know, you mentioned there's a lot of other discussions that, I guess you could call it that, that Trump and Elon Musk had during this very choppy, very technically challenged interview. By the way, I can't understand for the life of me why Elon Musk, every time he has one of these big X conversations, the technology never seems to work. It didn't work for DeSantis. It didn't work for Trump. He's got a lot of challenges there on that platform. But I think, look, you got to look at the big picture here, which is the fact that Vice President Harris is taking her message to everyday Americans, whereas Donald Trump is sitting down for a, what did he call it, like an interview of the century, a 2-hour technically challenged discussion with a billionaire. That contrast could not be more clear on this campaign. I also want to just say I worked for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2016. This sexist rhetoric is still very much alive and well. It certainly comes from Donald Trump, but that is not something that is going to deter Vice President Harris from taking her message to the voters, to putting American families front and center in this campaign. And that is something she thinks about every single day when she wakes up in this country. How am I going to improve the lives of voters? What agenda can I put forward to make their lives better? That is where her focus is.
More from Donald Trump's conversation with Elon Musk. At one point, Trump decided to weigh in on this. Time magazine's recent feature, and specifically the cover artwork that pictured his opponent, Kamala Harris.
She is terrible. She's terrible. But she's getting a free ride. I saw a picture of her on Time magazine today. She looks like the most beautiful actress ever to live. It was a drawing, and actually, she looked very much like our great first lady, Melania. She didn't look like Camilla. That's right. But of course, she's a beautiful woman, so we'll leave it at that, right?
Okay, that's another pronunciation of her name, Camilla. Guys, what? What? There it is. This is Kamala Harris. Beautifully drawn on the cover of Time magazine.
It looks like her.
It looks like Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. Does it look like Melania Trump?
I think he was trying to say they were both beautiful. And he's wasting time, though. But he does have a fair point that Vice President Harris is getting the greatest media honeymoon ever known to presidential politics. And I think that was his core complaint there with that cover.
I mean, look, I'm afraid to try to psychoanalyze what Donald Trump is doing here. Who knows? I don't know. I mean, I think it does kind of seem like he was trying to say it was like an overly flattering drawing of her. I don't know. But one thing it is not going to do is help him win suburban voters, swing voters. I mean, he's, to Brad's point here, there are only so many days left in this election, and he's spending them, sort of rambling nonsense rather than making a case. So if that's what he wants to do.
He's obsessed with Time magazine as well. From the
that is true.
Sorry.
That
you asked earlier, Casey, like why they weren't prepared. I think one thing was that Republicans that I talked to expected Democrats to fight, to have a big fight about who the person to replace Biden would be, and they did not think that people would coalesce around Harris as much as they did. And so you're seeing that he's just struggling with trying to find his footing against her because they didn't expect to be facing someone who had all of the support of the party behind her.
Let's bring in Jim Messina, who managed Barack Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. David Jolly is a former Republican congressman and MSNBC political analyst. And here in studio, Julie Roginski, a Democratic strategist, co-founder of the nonprofit organization Lift Our Voices. All right, David, we know Donald Trump hates to lose, maybe even more than most people. So does he think he's not hurting his cause, that he knows best? What's happening here?
Chris, the vanities of Donald Trump have always been something that raises eyebrows, and he can certainly read polls. I genuinely think the last 3 weeks has been one of the worst chapters of a presidential campaign in modern political history. It's that bad. Donald Trump's in free fall, and it is because of the candidate. Sure, I think his team could have done more to try to define Vice President Harris coming out of the gate. These ads apparently that are about to drop now, making her soft on crime, hitting her on immigration or her record as a prosecutor. But in some ways, they missed that opportunity, and their candidate himself seems completely incapable of prosecuting any case. Right now, Vice President Harris has kind of won the right direction, wrong direction conversation with voters. And Donald Trump needs to make this race about a hard contrast of ideology, but he's really incapable of doing that. As we saw at the RNC convention and at his speeches since, he is just rambling and off message and unable to execute the case. Donald Trump's in trouble. He's in a whole lot of trouble right now with this campaign.
I don't know, Julie. I mean, some of this stuff worked, right? In 2016, calling people names. I was out with Jeb Bush. He called him low energy Jeb. All those kinds of things that seem to get under people's skins. So now he's calling Kamala Harris names. He's called her dumb. He's called her a crazy liberal. And he's also commenting on her looks. I want to play a little bit of that Elon Musk conversation last night.
She is terrible. She's terrible. But she's getting a free ride. I saw a picture of her on Time magazine today. She looks like the most beautiful actress ever to live. It was a drawing. And actually, she looked very much like our great first lady, Melania. She didn't look like Camilla. That's right. But of course, she's a beautiful woman. So we'll leave it at that.
I remember the day that Joe Biden stepped down and through his endorsement to her, several analysts said she has to define herself before Donald Trump does. How is he defining her?
Look, this is the same kind of misogyny we talked about before, right? She's dumb, she's terrible, but she's hot. In other words, is what he's saying. So I guess she's going to get a free ride because she's hot, right? Because women who are hot, in his words and his terms, get a free ride. I mean, this is a woman who's a former prosecutor. She's a former attorney general. She's a former senator. She's a sitting vice president. She's accomplished. You may not agree with her. You may not think that her policies are the right policies, but she's accomplished. And yet he's reducing her down to her looks and basically saying that she's dumb, she's not so smart, but because she's a good-looking woman, kind of like my wife Melania, she's going to get a free ride from the media. I mean, this is somebody who was effectively nurtured in the 1980s New York Post mentality, the New York tabloids, where this kind of stuff existed and this kind of stuff was okay. He's 70-something years old. He doesn't get that this is not how it is anymore. And the more he talks, the more women, especially women, and the men who care about women, get incredibly offended because say what you will about Kamala Harris. And again, her name is Kamala. He doesn't even address her by her right name. Completely condescending because he doesn't actually respect anybody who's a woman. He's never respected women. His treatment of women has consistently been horrible. This is a man who sent out a second wife to talk about how great his sex, the sex was with them back in the 80s. And this is still the same kind of mentality he's got. And I think the more people see this, the more they're just going to be turned off. I mean, I agree with Congressman Jolly. This is just an awful, he's defining himself more than he's defining her, actually.
You know, Jim, I wonder if you see a difference in the way that other candidates, whether in primaries or Clinton or Biden in the general election, handle Trump and his attacks. Are they different than how Harris and team are approaching it? I mean, I think she's been pretty subdued. She doesn't play into it. The biting stuff usually is the end of a more substantive line in a speech or something on social media. What do you think of their strategy against Donald Trump, which frankly has foiled a lot of opponents in the past?
Yeah, I think it's really smart, Chris. I mean, for 10 years, the problem for Democrats with Donald Trump has been he says all these crazy things every day and we can chase all of it and it's super fun and you can raise a lot of money to do it. but it doesn't help move votes. And the Harris campaign has been incredibly disciplined not to chase every one of these comments and just stay on their message, stay with the message of hope, ride this momentum they have, where Donald Trump, we're 83 days before the election. We're under 4 weeks before voters in the first state of North Carolina start voting. And Donald Trump hasn't been in a battleground state for 9 days.
Joining us now, Susan Rice, former director of the Domestic Policy Council in the Biden administration. Obviously also former national security advisor and UN ambassador. Ambassador Rice, as we just heard, Donald Trump referring to Harris as Camilla, which doesn't seem to be an accident because he deliberately mispronounces her name. What do you think he's trying to achieve?
I think it's all part of his strategy to denigrate and objectify the vice president, as he does women of all sorts all the time. Donald Trump is incapable of respecting women. And it is not only in his DNA and how he has treated women at every stage of his life, personally and professionally, but it is at the root of his policy approach. Project 2025 and the Trump-Vance agenda is to take American society and American women back decades and generations to a time when we didn't control our bodies, we didn't have rights. And this is really the thrust of what his agenda is about. Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are very clear. This is an election about the future. Are we going to have a country where everybody counts, whatever their background, whatever their gender?
So Donald's latest moves have infuriated basically every woman in the country. MAGA women hate this too. They might not admit it, because, partisanship and bias and all of that, but they're all infuriated by it. Kamala's probably a little bit bothered, but honestly, I think she's kind of rising above it all because she knows that this is good politically for her. But a woman that's not happy is Melania. There were some rumors that she was going to maybe ease back into the schedule a little bit, not full time, but maybe come back. Remember her remarks not that long ago saying, stay tuned about me coming back in. The way she said it seemed to maybe indicate she was going to do a little bit more events. Maybe even just a couple of months, who knows, but she'd be around a little bit. Now, because of this, she is gone. And you see some indications of this. You see headlines saying she's gone missing more than usual. There are other headlines suggesting that she's not happy with some of the latest moves by Donald Trump, probably including this one. And you even see Ron Filipkowski, who's one of the expert Trump trackers on social media, who gets a lot of the clips, pulls them from right-wing media for us all to see. And what he says very hilariously is, Trump heads to North Carolina today, sadly, once again, without his loving wife Melania by his side. Of course, tongue-in-cheek, saying, like, she's not around, she's never around, and if she was going to be around, she ain't going to be around anymore because of that. Now, here's the thing, this dumping is very public, right? She's dumped Donald, severed herself from Donald to get rid of the political stench and maybe even some of the legal stench. But she won't leave him legally. There's cultural divorce, I guess. She won't leave him legally because there's the money and Barron and all of that. But mark my words, she's dumped him in a very public way simply by saying nothing.